Hello, I'm Jamie Guth. Not too long ago, on a warm spring day, thawing ice came barreling down this river and broke apart the bridge. People were driving on it at the time. One woman jumped out of her car just in time to watch it float down the river. Can you imagine how terrifying that must feel? Today, that's what we're talking about. Situations that make us feel as if we have no control whatsoever over our lives, that we may die at any time. War is like that.
War isn't good for people.
Matthew Friedman is director of the Veterans Administration National Center for Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder and a psychiatrist at the Dartmouth-Hitchcock Medical Center.
Furthermore, that the greater the exposure to his own stress, the greater the likelihood of having PTSD.
World War II soldiers experienced more psychiatric casualties on the battlefield than in any other recorded war. At one point, there were more men being discharged for psychiatric reasons than there were men being drafted. Awareness of this led to immediate on-site treatment for men in the Korean War. By the Vietnam War, breakdowns on the battlefield were at an all-time low. But these statistics miss problems that did not start emerging until a year and sometimes many years after the soldier had been sent home. Trauma had still taken place. Researchers have documented physical changes that occur in the brain when people are subjected to a crisis of this magnitude. These changes make the body more hyperreactive and alert for non-existent emergencies and blunt the feeling of pain. The more intense the trauma and the longer it lasts, the more likely it results in post-traumatic stress. Rick Lowe's is a Vietnam veteran. He lived for almost 20 years with fear, rage, and depression before coming to this Vietnam Veterans Center in White River Junction, Vermont. In 1968, Rick was 18 years old and a forward observer in the 101st Airborne Brigade Infantry. He called in support fire for indirect fire weapons.
When you're in the jungle, there are no rules, and the only rule is survival. And the things you have to do to survive leave you with a lot of guilt.
Guilt is a major symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder. So is alienation. People with PTSD feel different from others and pull back. Rick felt isolated from his high school friends and family. At a time when he most needed to deal with his guilt, he felt he had to keep quiet because of the strong reaction in the States against the war.
I had a lot of anger, lots of anger, and then I had a lot of shame.
But Rick had learned he could not express his feelings in the war.
In combat, the type of combat I was in, showing your expressions was giving up. You couldn't feel.
Why?
There's a lot of cases that would kill you. You had to be alert. You had to be tough. You had to be strong. There was no time for that. There was no time to feel.
So Rick numbed out. This is another symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder, trying to ignore feelings. Often people do that with alcohol or other drugs.
I remember when my daughter was born and everybody made a fuss over it, and I had to force myself to make a fuss. I had to pretend that I cared. You know, I felt empty inside. I didn't feel any emotions at all.
John doesn't care. In 1979, legislation was enacted to set up Vietnam Veterans Centers across the country. Vets were finding themselves unable to keep jobs, marriages were failing, and many were depressed and suicidal.
I got real suicidal, super suicidal, where I'd sit in the basement and stick a gun in my mouth and wait. Not really wanting to die, but not knowing what to do. You know, more confusion. I went to bed one Sunday morning and I started to cry, and I couldn't stop crying. I hadn't cried in Nobody had ever seen me cry. That freaked my wife out because she'd never seen me even, you know, I'd always had this tough exterior, you know, and I couldn't stop.
I was a kid on the outside, but inside I wasn't.
Rick Lowe's had to deal with the rage and guilt he'd felt all these years. He's been to alcohol treatment 3 times. He belongs to an alcohol recovery group, and he's been in rap groups at the vet center.
That as veterans we probably did and saw, smelled, and touched things that most people don't. And I think it changed us.
I couldn't believe that people actually opened up and told other people what they were ashamed of. It was a place that I could admit what I didn't do in Vietnam.
These groups are extremely intense. They're scary to the veteran. Most have a fear of going back to Vietnam. And we do go back to Vietnam, but the caution is we're dealing with memories now. Trauma victims, we've noticed here, have a time distortion in the sense that the traumatic event that was so powerful to them seems to be occurring now, in the present.
I didn't want to be like this any longer, you know.
Mm-hmm. Cars backfiring. It's not a backfire, it's a rifle shot. I mean, it is, you know it is. Your whole body just gears up and it's one big fight for survival, and you know, that's not a human, that's it's not even an animal response. I mean, that's what you've been trained to do as humans. You just lose your humanity, you just become a survival machine. And
I can be back where I was 15 years ago in a split second, with all the same reality, with much emotion, fear.
These same problems plague victims of other disasters.